and helping improve the Global South. Dr. Dodia possesses a wealth of expertise in the field, and he obtained a PhD in mathematical psychology from Columbia University, where he conducted research on human memory, and he's applied this research when he was working at the NASA Ames Center, where he applied this fundamental research to a lot of human safety and human memory concerns in various different fields and companies. He's taught seminars on statistics and data analytics at conferences all around the world. He's volunteered and done a lot of pro bono data service for a lot of charities in the US and Kenya, so it's really, really nice to have him here. He was also born and raised in Kenya, and he's an avid traveler and competitive sheep herder. Maybe you can ask him after this what he means by the competitive sheep herder part. But yeah, if we can give a round of applause and welcome Dr. Raul Dodia.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Let's get the slides up. There we go. So, thank you. Yes, as you know, I am from the AI for Good Research Lab at Microsoft. It's a fairly new lab, a few years old. And what I want to talk to you about here at Indaba, which is my first time here actually at Indaba, but second time for the AI for Good Lab. And last year we had 2 people come here, and they are highly published researchers. They said this was the best conference they've been to. They said that unlike other conferences where people are just trying to show their work and not listen to each other, here there was real enthusiasm, real hunger for learning things, and I now see what they meant, so we'll be back. AI for social good. The reason I'm talking about AI for social good is that is the focus for me and my lab. This is what I hire people for, to focus on social good. It's also the title for my book that's coming out soon. And if you look at the subtitle, it says Saving the World with AI. Well, that's a little bit of clickbait because my editor said we have to have a clickbaity subtitle, otherwise people won't buy your book. So I really just wanted AI for social good. That's what I'm going to be talking about. And the talk here is based on a few chapters, a couple of chapters in my book, where I talk about actual cases where we can do social good. There's potential to help populations and adapt to climate change. But then I also talk about when AI goes bad, it happens way more than we think it does. And well, I'll leave some more incendiary remarks for later. But then we have good AI, it can become bad. How can we prevent it from becoming bad? There are ways of taming AI for societal benefit. And unfortunately, we have not taken to that yet. There's still a lot to be done. So the opportunity for solutions is enormous. It is not a stretch to say that AI will transform society. It is not a stretch to say that AI will redefine what it means to be human. If it sounds a little too much, I used to think so too until I started working a lot in what's possible. And to see the potential for AI to do all sorts of things, I think we should be nudging it towards the social good side. Just recently, we have seen that we have access to so much more data than we ever had before. We now have access to satellite images, drone images. We have access to acoustic data, audio data, medical scans. We have Internet of Things, edge devices, sensors. All that is very expensive still, but it's going to come down. It's going to be possible for people to make use of that. What we have to do is ensure that humanity is at the center of AI development. We can't just do AI for AI's sake. It's a very dangerous tool. We have to make sure that humanity is at the center. And what is it that AI scientists do? So this quote, which is from many years ago but still applies now, "The best minds of my generation are making sure people click on ads, and that sucks." Jeffrey Hammerbacher, he was the person who coined the term data scientist at Facebook. And that resonates because that's where the money is, you know, people making more money. But what I'm trying to do is show people that you should be working in AI for good as well. A lot of these AI scientists are employed by large companies like Microsoft and Google, etc. And that's also, well, I hope that this is being recorded so my bosses will see this. It has to be made more equal. There has to be more equity. There has to be a wider group of companies, of startups, of cultural values that go into making AI. And that's also part of what we'll be talking about. So let me talk about a few use cases for AI for good, what we've been working on. One of the major things that we get asked for everywhere, wherever we go in the world, whether it's India or Africa or the US, particularly the US, is to help with disaster resiliency. Right now, hurricanes in the Caribbean and the US, the fires in Maui last month, disasters all over the world, the floods in Pakistan. What happens once it's done? Well, there are a lot of organizations, International Rescue Committee, the Red Cross and Red Crescent, etc., that know how to get there and mitigate the damage that's happened. But what we've heard from them is they could be more efficient. And so the Red Cross approached us. How could we help them become more efficient at recovering from disasters? And then this other organization, Team Rubicon, which is made up of ex-military people who retired from the military, but they still want to do something. They came to us and said, whenever there's something, we have huge logistics hurdles. Can you help us with that? So those are kinds of the things that we apply our AI skills to. So we're becoming better at that. In the Turkey earthquake, the Turkey-Syria earthquake earlier this year, it was very quick. And when we heard about it, we were devastated. Like we said, we are thousands of miles away. What can we do? We were lucky that we had high-resolution images, satellite images. So we started putting them together, started putting out where all the damage was, and sent it to Turkey, to the organizing government entity there. Similar for Maui, by the time the Maui fires came around, we were much more polished, and immediately we were able to get images and send it to people. And the American Red Cross was astounded. They were really happy. They said because of that, because of the AI work we were able to do using computer vision and satellite images, they were able to disperse aid 5 times faster than they've ever done before. However, for the Turkey earthquake, the World Food Program, we talked to them and we asked them, you know, we helped in the Turkey earthquake. And they said, yeah, but not really. They said that about 12 different organizations had done the same thing. They'd looked at satellite images and given them to us. But it wasn't really that useful, because what they really need is they need this information immediately, not 2 days, not 3 days. They need it within an hour, within 2 hours. And no one was able to do that. Also, cloud cover, as I'm sure many of you who work with satellite images know, we were using visual images. We weren't using radar or anything. So lessons learned, and I'll be talking about lessons later. The other thing that we always hear about is floods. Africa has cities and places that are built not really well with regard to floods. There's not enough drainage, or they cut down natural drainage, so floods happen. But here's a success story from India. SEEDS is an organization that we work with, and although you'll be hearing me talk about a lot of large organizations like the UN and the Red Cross, this is a very small organization. But because of what they've been able to do, and because of the little tiny bit of help we gave them, they've become a major force. What they want to do is reduce flooding, especially during the monsoon season in India. And they came to us and said, can you give us early warning systems? Can you give us a prediction of where the flood's going to be? And we need it done cheaply. Like, we can't pay $50 million for satellite images and things like that. So we used Landsat Sentinel-2 images, which are free. And we made a block level prediction of where the flood risk was. And the way we did this is we used satellite images to look at the building's roof type. The roof type, it ends up, is a very high correlate of the construction material, how well the infrastructure in the area is. It's a very high correlate, and it can give you a very good idea of what the flood risk is. So we were able to build things like this, maps like this. Now, I want to stress that we're not the only lab doing this. There are many, many other organizations doing this across the world. And they have different approaches. But once we were able to build this, they were actually able to test this out on 2 typhoons coming up. And cyclones, sorry, not typhoons. They're called different things in different parts of the world. And they found that the model that we built was actually really accurate, 80% or more. And that's good. But the question is, where do you go from here? Right, like, this is a private organization. We are a private organization. We build this together. How do we get the people in charge, the governments, to start using it? That was a question. But sticking to floods, the Pakistan floods also last year, they showed that we are still at the very beginning stages of flood response using AI. We weren't able to do much there. People tried to use social media, WhatsApp messages, Facebook messages, etc., to say this is where people need aid here, or this is where the damage is, etc. And they had to shut it down because misinformation flooded these messages. There was so much misinformation that you just couldn't make sense of what was going on. But we think that there should be early warning systems. This is what everyone asks for. They want an early warning system, even if it's a few days, even if it's a few hours, that will help save lives. One of the things we have to look at is like glacial floods. The floods in Pakistan, especially the ones about 10 years earlier in 2010, they were the reason because a glacier had burst its constraints and created this big flow of water. We can look at precipitation forecasts. We can look at hydrological models. There's so many ways we could build this. So here are some learnings from disaster response from the AI for Good lab. We need immediate response, but how do you get immediate response? Yeah, sure, there are satellites going around, but it's not like they are always focused on the area of interest. You have to take a satellite and tell it, move over here so you can do that. And not many people can do that. I had a sort of surreal experience. There was a volcano that was erupting near Virunga National Park, near the Ugandan, in the Congo, near the Ugandan border. And I happened to be sitting next to a person from Planet Labs. Planet Labs has a bunch of satellites, and they map the entire world once a day. And he said, oh, there's an explosion, there's an eruption. And he just texted someone, can we put a satellite on it? 10 minutes later, that satellite images. That's not possible all the time. It sounds amazing, but it's just not possible all the time. So what do? You also need radar, SAR images is what you need. The early warning systems, so the World Meteorological Organization, the WMO, wants to coordinate this. This is going to be a big topic in COP28, which is in November, December this year. The climate summit, it's a climate summit where all the heads of state, et cetera, come there to talk about climate. So early warning systems, that's what will really save lives. But we need data. We need so much data that's available all the time. And we need people to build models. They don't have to be global models. They can be very local models. In fact, I don't think global models are really going to work. It has to be very localized. And we also need a coordinated response. Like the WFP's reaction to 12, 15 organizations rushing and just, giving them all this data. That doesn't work. In Maui, it worked because the Red Cross was there. We could give the Red Cross knew everyone, they could coordinate everything, and that had a much better response. So this is not an AI problem. AI can only do so much. In fact, AI can do just a tiny little bit, but it helps everyone else become more efficient. And thinking small, I alluded to that. I think we should work more locally, not try to do global things. Although, having said that, I will show you some of the global things we're doing. Moving on to, so we talked about disaster resiliency. I want to talk about food and water security. I just opened a Microsoft lab in Nairobi, and that's one of our major focus areas, food and water security. Now, one of the best examples of this using AI is what NASA Harvest did. NASA Harvest works with a number of organizations. You may have heard of them. But what they did is when Russia invaded Ukraine, they thought, oh my gosh, there's going to be a huge decrease in the amount of wheat in the world. Prices are going to go high up. And because of that anticipation, prices did go really, really high. But what NASA Harvest with their land cover mapping model was able to do, but what they did was they took satellite images and they were able to say with high accuracy, this particular land is being used to grow wheat, this particular land is someone's house, this particular land is just a road. They were able to do that for the whole country, and eventually with the time series they were able to say that, well, actually the loss of wheat from Ukraine wasn't that bad. Prices started going down again. And their director, she says, satellite data enables us to do that. Absolutely true. And this is part of what we're going to be doing in Africa. We talk to people in Kenya, we talk to people in Rwanda, we talk to people, actually now that I think about it, mostly in East Africa. And everyone wants this. Everyone wants to know what their land is being used for. Even little counties, they say, yeah, we grow this, and we ask them how, like, where, and they don't exactly know how much they're growing. So this is a big question. In Kenya, we're working with the Nature Conservancy. It's a global nonprofit headquartered in the US, where we want to help, again, with food security, food and water security. We want to show how water is being used in the Mount Kenya region. It's a region that's highly fertile. It produces most of the water for the populated regions in Kenya. And what happened is a huge increase in population. It started creating conflict. There was not enough land. There were not enough resources for all the people there. And we wonder, it's a question of making it more efficient. It's a question of making sure everyone has something. So there's someone in the audience here. His name is Gilles Achame. He's working on this right now. And he was able to take satellite images from planet again and figure out where the boundaries of the fields are. And we're interested in smallholder farms, not the large plantation owners. And the smaller the farm, the harder it is to identify. And Gilles was able to do that. And now the next question is, which ones of these farms, fields, are being irrigated? He was able to do that. Now we want to figure out, like, how do we make this? What's the next step? What does the Nature Conservancy do? The Nature Conservancy is working with a number of organizations in Kenya, and they want to improve irrigation practices, they want to improve food yields, they want to improve water management, and they want to preserve the existing forest. So how do we draw a line from what Gilles is doing, like giving them all this data, to all of this happening? It's a very long line. But without this, if they were to go to the government or someone and say, this is what you need to be doing, the first question they'll say is, what proof do you have? What data do you have? What evidence do you have? And this is what Gilles is giving them. So the learnings from food and water security is that satellite data is great to use, but it's expensive. We happen to be able to use it, but most people will not be able to use it, and that's one of the inequities. Ground truth validation is necessary. So we could make all the predictions we want in Kenya or wherever, in Africa or the world, but those are just predictions from the model. Are they real? We need someone on the ground. We need someone to go and say, yes, there is actually a field there, or yes, that's a road, not a river, or something like that. We need people to give us the ground truth. And given the barriers here, I think governments have the power, the money to step up. What Norway has done is they went to Planet and said, we'd like to buy all your satellite images in perpetuity, kind of, from this latitude in the north to this latitude in the south, covering this area. And we'll open it up to anyone who wants it. It was very, very expensive, but the Norwegian government, but Planet said, sure, if you're going to pay us, sure. So Planet, the Norwegian government bought all that data, and now it's available for everyone to use. You can go to the Norwegian Forest website and apply for it, and you'll get access to it. And the UAE, because they're hosting the climate summit this year, they want to do something similar. They want to know that, can they buy the data and open it up so all the smart people here have access to it, have ideas, have some creativity, and see what they can do with it. So given these examples, and some of these are calculated examples, meaning it's much cheaper to do this than to run their own AI things. Like, why not have you work on it, you know? But it works for the world in general. The other things we've learned is that the difference in working in, say, US, Europe, New Zealand is very different from working in Africa in terms of the data availability. Like in New Zealand, they wanted to know where all their wetlands are, where all the water is. And guess what? Like every little township, every little county had done a survey and given us the data. It was a really easy project. We can't do that in most places in Africa. We can do that in the US. We can't do that in Kenya or even Benin or Nigeria. So that's one of the learnings. That's one of the learnings we are trying to overcome. Okay, one more example, energy. The Global Renewables Watch. This is one of the global data sets I was talking about. So the Global Renewable Watch is basically an effort to know where are all the renewable sources out there. And we realized the word all is a little hard, so where are all the solar farms and wind farms out there? So that's our ambition. So the UN Sustainable Development Goal, which is increase the share of renewable energy, that's part of it. Track and forecast country level commitments. But the TNC, again, one of our partners here is the National Conservancy. They had another reason for doing this, because it turns out that all of these are not mutually exclusive. If you're trying to increase renewable energy around the world, you're not doing something else. Let me show you what the tool looks like. So this is a tool as of last year. We'd only done 5 countries. We started with India, then we went to a few other countries. And what we do is we use satellite data to figure out where solar farms are. You can spot them. You can see where all the windmills are that produce wind energy. You can even see them if they're in the ocean, where many of them are based. And what you see is for each division, each administrative division, you can see where they're located, and you can calculate over time what the change in renewable energy has been. So in India, you can see there's been a huge increase in solar energy, while wind energy has remained about the same, and slightly increasing. And it can also show you, it's not so easy to see here, but it can also show you what the land cover is, like over what kind of land were the solar farms used. Now, what's important here is that the land you need for solar farms is often this flat land, this nice flat land, which is perfect for agriculture. So you're making a trade-off. Are you going to grow food here, or are you going to get solar energy here? And so this kind of data set allows people to see what trade-offs are being made. It brings things out into the open. It allows policymakers, governments, to decide to see what they're giving up, or to decide what their policies should be. So again, this is a data set we've created. The tool, etc., will be made available to anyone. You can actually access it right now if you go to Global Renewables Watch and ask for a password. Now, Virunga Energy is continuing with energy. Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, vast ecosystem. It's not just rainforest, which I thought at first. It's a vast ecosystem of savannas, rainforests, etc. There's more species than any other protected area on Earth. And the director of the director of Virunga National Park, he's been there for 15 more years. He's had assassination attempts because of what he's trying to do, but he's basically trying to, that's where the mountain gorillas are also. What he's trying to do is conserve the park through making it economically viable for the people living around it. There are no tourists allowed there. It's too dangerous. There are militias there. So what he's doing is he's creating all these industries, and he created this hydropower plant which supplies cheap electricity to all the micro, not even micro, ultra micro businesses. You've seen them when you drive around, the really tiny businesses. How can they get electricity for really cheap? How can they grow their enterprises? So he has this amazing plan which is working right now. He came to us and said, hey, can you, apart from all the animal biodiversity and all that, can you help us predict what can you help us forecast what the need will be for electricity? Can you help us predict who's a good bet among all these people who want electricity? All those kinds of things. Now, sure, we can. This is not a neural network, though. It's a regular statistical forecasting model. But that's the point. I think point number 3 here, use appropriate methods. You don't have to make everything into AI. AI is a tool. AI is, when you come down to it, it's just a statistical model with way more degrees of freedom than regular statistics models. Use what you have to do to get the job done. I already mentioned earlier about the need to create data sets. That's the big thing. If you don't have a good data set, then a data scientist or machine learning is really an indulgence. They can't really do much. What we need is data sets. We need data sets to be available and to be made free. And not just made free, but made them accessible, findable, approachable, etc. I'll be harping on this theme more and more, you'll see. Okay, let's see. I want to tell you how bad AI is, so I'm going to rush through this. It's also revolutionizing science. So these are some of the areas we've been working on: proteomics, astronomy, meteorology, anthropology. And again, there's another person from my lab, Akram. I don't know if he's here, but he's working on some of these. Proteomics. I want to highlight proteomics because in my mind, this has probably been the most amazing AI achievement to date. Proteomics is to do with the proteins that make us up. They're really what make our skin, everything, our nerves, our blood, everything. And they're also where, if you want medicine, medicine would work by medicine is molecules. You find a protein, a particular shape of a protein, and the medicine will lock into that shape, and voila, you're almost cured. However, proteins, this problem of proteins, of the shape they take, there are billions of proteins. This is an example of the kind of shape they take. And they don't stay in that shape, they move around, they change shape, they turn, etc. This particular protein, it's a single molecule, but it has 3 different sections that move and change independently of each other. It is a horrifically computationally intractable problem. People thought that this is, well, the holy grail in a way. But then DeepMind created something called AlphaFold, which revolutionized everything. And to me, this was really one of the biggest achievements of AI. It can identify the structure of a protein. You don't no longer have to spend years trying to figure it out. You can spend maybe a few weeks or a few months or, I don't know, maybe a few days. And it was soon followed by many other updates of that, like Rosetta Fold, etc. Moving on just to the learnings. So AI offers a new approach to correlating observations, computationally intractable problems. But remember, one criticism of using AI is that it's not giving you a model. It's giving you a correlation, like you see these observations and you see these observations, this is how they might come about. But the thing is, scientists are smart. They see this new evidence and they can fill in the gaps. They can see what the model should be. Plenty of other areas that I haven't talked about. Another thing we're doing is we're creating population maps across the world. Why population maps? Well, if you're lucky, your country will do a census every 10 years. 3, 4 years from now, that census will be outdated. 7, 8 years, it'll really be outdated. So again, we're using satellite images to figure out where people could be statistically. And actually, we're having pretty good success. So within a fairly small area, you know where people are. Now, why would you want to know that? Well, plenty of reasons. If there's a disaster, you want to know how many people might have been there and affected and where you should focus. If you need to be growing food, developing an area, you know where you have to focus. And it's surprising how many countries have no idea where their people are. Biodiversity, we use microphones or camera traps hanging on trees, under the ocean, etc., to see where the wildlife, etc., is. Communication for languages. Language is a huge area in Africa, as you know. News gathering, we gather well, I won't go into that. And health and radiology, etc. All of these are, this was an interesting one, the justice one. the International Criminal Court came to us and said, hey, can you give us evidence that Russia bombed schools and hospitals? And we were able to give them something which they will probably use in some manner now. Which kind of leads us into this, the second part of the talk. And don't worry, the second part is shorter than the first part. When good AI goes bad. Now, a few years ago, before ChatGPT was a big thing, Microsoft released this chatbot called Tay. And Tay was this happy-go-lucky young entity that would learn from people interacting with it. And within a couple of days, by the third day, Microsoft was forced to shut it down. Why? Because they released Tay on Twitter, and all the Twitter bullies descended on Tay and started teaching it how to be racist, how to be misogynistic, and basically they taught it every bad thing they could think of. That's Twitter for you. But it completely corrupted Tay, and for some reason the researchers at Microsoft, they hadn't seen this coming. They kind of believed, you know, people would be so happy, they'd be interacting, like tell it nursery rhymes and cooking recipes and things like that. Couldn't have been further from the truth. So this is what happens because we scientists, well, maybe not you, but a lot of scientists tend to be very optimistic about what they're doing. They have something noble in mind. How could anyone do anything, you know, less than that? Almost everyone else, that's the answer. These are two of the people call them godfathers of AI, Geoffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio. They were working in AI before it was popular, during the AI winter of the 80s and 90s. And now, a lot of what you see in AI is a result of their work. A lot of the models you use, a lot of the techniques you use is because of what they've done, along with Yann LeCun. But very recently, like this year, Geoffrey Hinton, he quit Google and says he regrets his whole life's work. Yoshua Bengio, he says, he used to say that we should be very aware of the ethical nature of our work. We should put ethics at the center of our work. And he now says that he feels like he has failed. He feels lost because he didn't see what would happen and he didn't put ethics at the center of his work. This was shocking news. Now, this was not new because earlier there were other people like Bill Gates who thought that this was AI is a big danger to the world. Elon Musk would say, you know, look out, it's going to take your job and start World War III. And people laughed them off a little bit, saying, oh gosh, you're being alarmistic. But these are more serious people, if I can say that. These are more respectable people. So AI researchers, when they saw this happen, they're wondering, oh, what are we doing? And it puts a pause into the way people are thinking about AI. Should we be going this fast? Here are some of the things that are happening. I call it the surveillance society. Imagine if you are the governor or a ruler of a country that's fairly well off, and you're bordered by other countries that are not so well off, and there are people crossing the border illegally as refugees coming to your country, and you don't want them there. So you can take one of these drones and build a model that detects people at night, can detect people in the desert, etc., and figure out where they're hiding, where they are, and then stop them from coming in. You could do that. I don't think that's the use that people who build these models had in mind. The people who build these models in mind were principled. They probably had something in mind like helping with disaster recovery, like finding people when there was an earthquake, using infrared imagery to finding people when there was a mudslide and they were hidden behind debris. That's what they had in mind. Or Or you could think of, again, in Virunga, and this is a true one, in Virunga National Park, as I said, there are militias there fighting, and these militias will often attack villages and kill a bunch of adults just to instill fear. And so what they're doing is they're using drones for exactly that purpose, again, like this, to get an early warning system for militias. And then they can warn the villages, they're coming, go run and hide. And that works. So good AI, finding people in debris, or bad AI, which is stopping people who are suffering from coming into your country. Facial recognition is another example of surveillance society. It's very convenient. Like, you know, if you go through air travel, you don't have to have your passport and your boarding card. They just look at you and say, yeah, we know who you are, you can go. In China, you can buy food using your face. But does convenience outweigh privacy? Like, are you okay with that? Are you okay with you know, someone having a database of your face, your fingerprints, your retina scans, etc.? If you haven't done what they say, what the people collecting this data say is, if you've done nothing wrong, there's nothing to worry about, which is a false argument, and we'll see why. Then there are things like voice and speech recognition, which have actually led to actual crimes, like bank crimes. Voice recognition, speech, not recognition, but actually speech deep fakes. Again, Microsoft released very recently a speech emulator, an AI-based way of imitating anyone's speech. And it was so scarily accurate that native speakers in a lot of languages could not tell that this speech belonged to no one, this audio belonged to no one, it was made up. One of the crimes that happened 3 years ago is in Hong Kong, a deep fake voice, someone made a phone call to the lawyer, to the director of a bank, and they'd already laid the groundwork. There had been some email messages, etc. And they imitated the voice of the president or a director of the bank and said, okay, yeah, this deal is done, which they had laid the groundwork for. We need to move $40 million to this bank account. And you'd think there would be more safeguards in place, but maybe the culture is slightly different. The person receiving that phone call, he had all this proof in front of him, other paperwork. He said, sure. That $40 million disappeared. $35 million disappeared. And then the United Arab Emirates, they launched an investigation because they lost $400,000. But they're the only ones who seem to have launched an investigation into it, like what was going on. And they figured out, you know, people are using deep fakes, etc. But the romance crimes, they could hit anyone. What's a romance crime? A romance crime is when, picture someone who's sitting in their home at their laptop, they're lonely, and they're on a dating site, and suddenly this amazing person reaches out to you and say, hey, I noticed you and let's connect. They connect, they get along really well. Eventually, not just emailing and IMing, they start talking on the phone. Really great connection. And then they haven't met in person yet. And then suddenly this other person, I'll call them the fake person, says, oh, you know, it's my son's birthday tomorrow, but I forgot to send him a gift. Could you do something for me? Of course I will. Slowly, slowly, it's a slippery slope, and then they're buying a house together, or she's sending him money to travel to some other country, etc. And then eventually they'll find out, but they've lost their life savings that way. Now, why should we be worried about that? It's not a retail scam. What AI is doing with ChatGPT, with speech emulation, you have farms of these. You have farms of people doing this, reaching out to people, and one person could be scamming like a dozen people at the same time with this. Apparently, it turns out that the most common thing is for the faker to pretend that they're in the US Army stationed somewhere in Iraq or in the Middle East somewhere. So if you ever get an email from them, my warning is, don't respond. Now, the other thing which bothers me is predictive policing. Imagine you have all this power of AI, right? Or machine learning. And you have all this data, and actually you can go to Los Angeles County, they make all their data available of where people have been arrested, what they were arrested for, or if they were even stopped, not arrested. They have all this amazing, huge amounts of data. Surely you could put it together and help the police police the area better, making you safer. They could probably just figure out through all this where the hotspots are. This is where this crime is going to be committed. This is where shoplifting is likely to happen at this time of day or whenever. Well, so let's take John, right? John, he lives in a tough crime neighborhood, and he finds a wallet on the street and he picks it up to find the owner or turn it into the police. And this is an area, because it's a high crime neighborhood, that the police have flagged for illegal activity, so there are more patrols there, more police coming by there. There's an increased police presence. So before John can do anything like take it to the police or anything, an officer sees him, pick up the wallet, starts questioning him, and takes him in to the police station. He's charged with theft and booked into jail. And because of his age, his sex, his race, whatever, the predictive policing may recommend keeping him in jail until his court date. And there's potential he'll go to jail for just picking up a wallet with good intentions. He might go to jail. So the implications of predictive policing, which is individuals may be unfairly targeted, and it reinforces biases in the criminal justice system. Why? Why do we do this? Well, the thing is, we're taking this statistical model, giving it to a fairly naive user base, the police, like they're not statisticians, and asking them to say, take this with a grain of salt. But that's not how decision making works. It's either yes or no. People tend to be binary in their decision making. If this godlike AI model is telling me that there's going to be a crime here, there's going to be a crime here. That's what you kind of fulfill that. Predictive policing is a big thing. Luckily, a lot of cities have come under pressure to shut it down. But in the UK and a lot of other places, it still continues. And then surveillance capitalism. This is a term coined by this Harvard professor, Shoshana Zuboff. It's basically the world we're living in right now. This is when, if you're, you know, you've seen this before, like if you're getting something for free, you're actually paying for it some other way. So if you're on Meta social networks, if you do a Google search, or if you're 1 out of 50 people who actually do a Bing search, you're buying into this. You're selling your information here. It makes, what does it do? Well, it helps them target ads to you better. It helps them understand you maybe a little better than you knew yourself. It helps like this discontinued Amazon thing, like if you bought this, you might like this kind of thing. It makes it easier for us, but do we really want consumerism to be easier at this expense? When they have this kind of information, they can manipulate your opinions. There have been plenty of studies showing how your opinions can be manipulated by the kind of algorithm, kind of news that Meta will show you, that you'll see on the Bing page or the MSN homepage or other places, there have been studies showing that Meta particularly, will exploit social divisions because those get more engagement, more likes, and you're more likely to click on an ad if you're angry or negatively aroused like that. It can have far-reaching things because they can manipulate your political opinions. They can manipulate your opinions about medicines, etc. They can make you vote for candidates that they want. There was a paper in 2017 by a number of high-ranking European scientists who warned about exactly that this was coming down the pipeline. Let's see. AI-powered disinformation. What you see here on the right is a metric that I created called the Russian Propaganda Index. It's basically how much propaganda is Russia putting out about anything, but particularly about the Ukraine war. Can you guess what that spike is up there? If you can read the bottom, you can see what the dates are. That spike is just before it invaded Ukraine. So it was getting ready to invade Ukraine. Using things like this, we can determine when nation states, and I'm not accepting the US or other countries from this, want to change opinion about something, when they put out all this information to sway public opinion. But now, what we used to have before is people would write articles on something, and it was kind of easy to detect them that they were fake or made up because they'd use all these non-colloquial terms, or they would have all these spelling mistakes. Sometimes they were easy. But guess what? You could be a disinformation operative very easily using ChatGPT. Now you can create news articles and all these things without us really detecting it very easily. I already told you about the social media during the 2020 floods. That's, I don't know how intentional that was or if that was just genuine confusion, but that's possible. Now, this is where misuse of AI becomes really important. What AI is doing, and again, whenever I say AI, I'm talking about the data that's fitting into AI. What AI is doing is it's not creating any new things right now. It's reflecting society. It's taking the data it finds out there, learning from it, and saying this is how it is, and just showing you what society is like. So the biases it perpetuates. This is an example from Amazon, and these are real examples. Amazon is known for trying to automate everything, and they tried to automate hiring for their computer coders. And so they fed it a bunch of resumes, and the dependent variable, the Y, was whether that person had been hired or not. Now, unfortunately, the tech field, the computer science field here is very heavily male-dominated. So what the AI learned is that being a man is good, being a woman is not so great. And even if you had something like women's chess club captain, it inferred, oh, this must be a woman, less chance of getting hired, so I'm not going to recommend this person. So it rejected perfectly good candidates. Now, to their credit, Amazon quickly realized what was going on, and they shut down the program and went back through all their rejected candidates to reevaluate them. But this is just an example. You can think of other examples where AI bias might be perpetuated. Economic bias. Let's say you're trying to create, a bank is trying to create an algorithm to say what interest rate we should charge on a loan or who we should be giving it to. Again, existing data will show that rich people are more likely to get a loan. Rich people will have lower rates. And it will probably not take in data like non-traditional data like making payments on rents or other kinds of spending habits. What it will do is it will perpetuate the bias against lower income people. It will say that these people historically haven't been chosen for loans, so therefore we're going to be very conservative and not recommend a loan or recommend a high interest rate for them. And then, so that's the economic bias, and then this is what I call implicit bias, which is people don't think they're biased, but they are implicitly being biased. A lot of racism shows up in here. So if you were to sometimes do a search for an image of a professional person or what a professional meeting should look like, you'll probably get an image that will look like this beardless white man giving you a firm handshake with short-cut hair, etc. There's a lot of implicit bias going on in there, as you can see. First of all, how did this get in there? It went in there because of humans labeling it. Humans say, this is a professional image, or this is what I think a professional should look like. And by labeling it that way, we made the AI learn that. So things like untraditional, well, what they would call untraditional hair, or even chef's whites or medical scrubs, or shaking hands very firmly, that's what gets enshrined in the AI. So the devil is in the data. It shows us what we show it. The other thing is open source. I'm a big fan of open source. Anything that my lab does, we give away. We make it open source or give away to people who can use it. We don't keep any intellectual property. But imagine when you put things into the open source, it's not just good people who are going to be using it, it's going to be bad people as well. When you put things into open source, you want to be careful about what kind of things you're putting out there. Are there any privacy concerns, security concerns? And there's also careless AI. What careless AI is when you take a model that's been created in one context and apply it to another context. An example is when you take these apps or these medical apps that were created in the Western world and apply them to Africa. They will give you recommendations that are just not possible here. Or if you take agricultural apps or agricultural models that were built, say, during the Green Revolution in Asia and Europe, etc., and they'll tell you to plant certain crops in a certain ways that just don't work in many African contexts. And then people will wonder, why did the Green Revolution in Africa fail? So people don't mean it badly, but you do have to take the context into account. Putting safeguards around AI, this is the finale. When electricity came out in the 1890s, in the 19th century, scenes like this, maybe not as dramatic, maybe they were as dramatic as this, but people died. They didn't know how to safely use electricity. They plugged things in, they had voltages all over the place, they had sparks, etc., they had fires, until one day, this insurance person, William Merrill, yep, he said, we need standards. We can't be doing this. We need standards. He tried to get the city of Boston to do it. They weren't interested. Then he went to Chicago, where they listened to him. And he started this thing called the underwriters at the, not Universal, why do I have Universal? Universal Laboratories, which became Underwriters Limited. And what they do is, if you take your electrical component or your device and look at the back, you'll see a sticker and it'll have a UL in it. that means that this organization, this independent organization, has certified that it's safe to use. So this is where a new technology, electricity, needs regulation. This is where we are at now. We're in the wild west of AI right now, I feel. We need some safeguards like this. And there are people who say we shouldn't put any restrictions on AI because if we put restrictions on AI, that other country over there will not, and they'll go way ahead of us. Well, what happens when you have unfettered research and technology? You have things like medical experiments done on humans without any oversight, without any regulations. In World War II, we know of Japan and Germany conducting horrific experiments on people. But the same thing happened in the US. The US, the most famous one is the Tuskegee syphilis study, where they told black people that they were getting some sort of vaccine or something. Instead, they were injecting them with syphilis to see what the life cycle of syphilis would be. This resulted in such a huge outcry when it was found out that it changed the research, human subject research world entirely. Have you heard of IRBs, institutional review boards? This is how they came about in the 1960s or 70s. Basically, these are the boards which say, if you're going to be doing human experimentation, these are the guidelines you must follow. And again, I feel that's very relevant to where we are with AI today. What about AI governance? What are we going, like who's thinking about these things? Who's doing this? Now, the AI Act in Europe, it's being made, it's being created, it's under consideration. And hopefully when they put it there, we'll see something called the Brussels effect. The Brussels effect is basically when Europe does something, the rest of the world tends to follow. It's, the example that they give is GDPR, the privacy regulations. When Europe put that together, it really inspired a lot of other countries to have similar legislation passed. So that's what they call the Brussels effect. So the idea is that the AI Act will give a format, a framework for people to build their own legislation. In the US, there are a couple of legislation in California and other places, but there's no federal legislation yet. Although there are stronger and stronger calls for some legislation, for some regulation. China, in 2017, it put together a goal for dominating AI by 2030, and it's creating a bunch of legislation, but to tell you the truth, I really don't know what it is. In South Africa, there's a Protection of Personal Information Act, but that's really a data privacy act. And as far as I know, there's no related AI legislation. Maybe the South Africans here can tell me. Rest of Africa, nothing. There's, maybe we're in the early stages, but I don't see anything yet. Let me see what time it is. Okay. Let me wind up soon. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is what we need when we're putting safeguards around AI. We need ethical development. We need, when we're developing it, we need to see what biases are we building into the AI. We need safety and security. And by this, I don't just mean no one can break into your account. It's more like your life, your livelihoods are not being under threat. We need accountability and transparency. When something goes wrong, when a Tesla on self-driving mode kills someone, or when a medical model recommends a course of treatment that ends up harming someone, who is responsible? Accountability. And then transparency. Why did it make that decision? Is it because of the data? Is it because of a human who decided to ignore it? Like, why is this happening? data protection and privacy, and balancing innovation and regulation. So balancing innovation and regulation is, again, the question of, if we put regulations around AI, we're going to be stifling innovation. If we don't stifle innovation, if you let AI run riot, then we'll have other problems. So what's the balance there? Now, there are a number of slides which I'm going to skip right now because just buy my book, you can read about it. But I do want to talk about this. If people are worried about regulation, there are a number of ways to think about it. You could have regulatory sandboxes, like try it in a sandbox, in a real world sandbox, and see how it works out. You could have public-private partnerships. WMI is producing drought-tolerant maize in Africa with approved field trials, so try it and see how that works out. You could have international agreements, which is what the Atomic Energy Commission, the Cartagena Protocol of Biosafety is, those kinds of things. Or you could have voluntary consultation. So the FDA has a biotechnology consultation program for genetically engineered plants. This is where the FDA will look at it and give them your mark of approval. We could have something for AI. And it becomes something like the UL mark, where if you don't have it, people won't trust you. But there are challenges. One thing we see with the AI Act in Europe, for example, is that the AI Act, they were caught completely off guard by ChatGPT. Now, you know, granted, everyone was caught off guard by ChatGPT. So what they had to do is suddenly, they had to build in safeguards around foundational models, large language models, models that have no problem lying to you, but you think they're telling the truth. So build that into the legislation. And then if you have different regulations in different countries, it opens the door to arbitrage, like, oh, I can't build this model here, I'll go somewhere else. I'll give you an example. So I was working on detecting child abuse online, when images of child abuse, child pornography were being shared online. Now, the US has regulations that did not allow me to build models to detect that and stop it. The UK has a very different system, so I went to the UK and built my models there. And then once they were built, now I could use them in the US. There are these weird loopholes there. And ethics and transparency and accountability, they don't increase the cost of AI development. It should be a built-in cost. In the long term, it's going to lead to a healthier future for us. It's a necessity. So I'll stop there. I hope you see that we are living in an era where AI is a very powerful force. It's powerful than any of us. It's going to be dangerous if we don't regulate it. It's going to be dangerous if we don't develop it ethically. And we really need everyone in the world, not just isolated areas, to subscribe to this philosophy where AI can't just develop unfettered. But it should still develop because it can do a lot of good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rahul. I think we have time for maybe 2 questions. Is there anyone who has any questions? Okay, there's one hand over there. Okay.
Yeah, Thank you, Rahul, for that really great presentation. My name is Jabez, and I'd just like to get your thoughts around what role Africa could play in this policy, particularly since we've seen a lot of double standards by these big tech platforms. When they apply such models in Western contexts, they have an incentive to change because of proper regulatory mechanisms, but then when they apply such models in African contexts, they don't have a big incentive. So if you think about Meta's models documented failures in Ethiopia in like detecting hate speech, or if you think about World Vision recently in Kenya harvesting people's data, right? We currently do not have any mechanisms to hold these platforms accountable. So while all this regulation is novel and seems it may work for other contexts, what can African governments do currently to be able to protect their citizens against the application of these models, particularly in this early phase where Africa seems to be like a test ground where there's basically no regulation to hold these platforms accountable? Yeah.
Thank you. That's a really, really great question. The answer is really easy, right? It's Africa has to develop its own institutions, its own talent, and its own data. All three, they're not nearly at the level of the West. Now, it's an easy answer, but it's a very hard one to implement. We need to have African data sets. We need to have African institutions. And there's a reason why when you think of Africa as a whole, everyone I was talking to someone earlier, everyone is sort of flocking towards Kenya right now. The reason they're flocking towards Kenya right now is because the government has been very receptive to new ideas of AI development, etc. So I think while there are things that individuals and private people can do, which is actually the most sustainable way of doing this, conferences like this, Indaba, the startups, there were a bunch of startups giving their pitches earlier. Startups like that, that's what's needed. The knowledge is there, the ability is there. What's missing is the funding, right? When we look at the startup world here, what's missing is there's no one here to give them funding. There's no one here to help them develop all these things we're talking about, the data sets, the technology for the African context. That's something for people to take on, like how do you get that funding? I don't have the answer to that, which is why I said it's an easy thing to say what you need, but how do you get it? I don't know.
Okay, thanks for the talk. I have a couple of questions. The first one is on AI for social good, as you gave us plenty of examples. If it's not done in a very sensitive and careful manner, the whole idea of this AI for social good can cause more harm and more damage than actual good. For one, it can come across as, that savior mentality where we will come and build it for you. So in terms of, long-term visions, in terms of long-term change, long-term impacts, as well as building tools. For example, you gave us an example of, going into disaster areas and helping people. So as well as going in and building, do you also do maintenance, knowledge transfer? Do you, do you do kind of, development of, hold on. So my question is whether you do capacity building with the actual people that you are supposed to help. My second question is, you presented Joshua Binjo and Jeffrey Hinton as the ones that raised the red flag for ethics. This might come across as somewhat erasing of Black women's work, because if you look at people like Sophia Noble, Roha Benjamin, they've been pointing this out. They've been working on this. I mean, Gender Shades came out in 2008. That was 5 years ago. So these are things that a lot of people, especially at the margins of society, more particularly Black women, have been raising, have been working on. So how are you careful in approaching that, in actually giving credit where it's actually due? It's not actually only a matter of credit. It's also the way the Yoshua Binjo and this crowd approaches and frames the whole questions has a whole lot of problems. For once, framing ethical issues as, as rogue AI, as something that has its own agency, that's uncontrollable, which contributes to the AI hype, which brings more problems as opposed to solutions. So putting that framing aside, my question is, how about, going back to the work that's been happening for years and using those as a reference point? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. Answer the first one, which is when we opened the lab in Nairobi, we came in with the very sensitive realization. We're very aware that this is someone coming in and potentially just saying, we know what's good for you, this is what you should be doing, this is how you should be doing it. So when we created what I call the Africa AI Innovation Council, I made sure that we're actually working with NGOs from Africa that are telling us what's needed. I'll give you an example. So we sat down in Uganda, we sat down with a bunch of people to talk about what we thought was important. We talked about smart mini grids of electricity. We were talking about renewable energy. And we'd invited all these local leaders. We'd invited a few nonprofits, etc. And funnily enough, I don't know if this was intentional or not, all the men were on side and all the women were on another side. And we talked about what we wanted to do, and the men said, yeah, this is excellent, this is good. Then someone asked the women, you haven't said much, what do you think? And they told us, well, what we really need is water. We need a way to make water more available, we need water for agriculture, etc. And that's how we started realizing that it's not so much energy, it's more like food and water security that's might be a bigger issue. And that kind of put us on the path of finding out more about that. But to the point is, what you said is, like, we want to come in not bringing Western solutions. We want to come in here and see if we can learn from NGOs here and work on the problems that they're telling us is important. The capacity building is something that I look at and see it as a long-term problem. You can't build capacity tomorrow. You have to start building it now for it to be ready in 2, 3, 4 years' time. So to do this, you need education, you need access to information, but most of all, you need funding. You need the ability for people to have a space where they can talk to other people. You need the ability for people to take what they're learning and apply it to real problems. And that, I think, is where I would say that Microsoft isn't doing that right now. I'd say I don't know what Google is doing, but I don't know what all the big multinationals are doing. But that's what's really needed. I think you hit the nail on the head when you say it's really capacity building that's needed, not just take the model and use it. So that's question one. But question two, the reason I used Benjo and Hinton is because they're incredibly well known, right? And they've actually built a lot of the systems that we're using. And for them to repudiate their own work is a huge deal. But at the same time, I take the point that a lot of these opinions, a lot of these realizations happen outside of the limelight. Like, sure, they may be getting all the recognition, all the limelight, but there are people other places. There are people who will be putting up posters outside. There will be people who will be writing in journals that may not be the top journals because they're not well known themselves, We'll be putting out ideas there that may seem out of the mainstream, but will come out there. That's a perennial problem. I wouldn't say that's necessarily just limited here. I think that's across all of science. I don't have good solutions to the two questions you raised, but those are the questions you should be raising. Those are the questions you should be asking to make other people feel a little bit uncomfortable. And when people feel uncomfortable, maybe they'll change something.
Okay, we'd like to thank Dr. Raul again. It's really inspirational seeing all the great work that him and his team are doing in Africa. If you have any other questions, please do reach out to him after this talk. Just two quick announcements. So a white Indaba bag was lost. I think it was on the bus on the way to the dining hall. So if you found a white Indaba bag, it has like a red notebook inside. And I think it has something related to Strathmore University. So if you find a white Indaba bag and you found it on a bus somewhere, please do give it to someone in a red shirt. And then now we will have a bit of a break for maybe 10 minutes, and then we'll have the communities panel. So please do come back in 10 minutes for the communities panel. Thanks.